You really need to save your applause for our MCs and our special guests this evening. So thanks for arriving on time, taking your seats. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Wayne Benson. I'm your national counselor for Manitoba. But it's my privilege and honor tonight to welcome three terrific MPs from our Manitoba caucus who will be the co-MCs for tonight. And I will allow them to introduce themselves individually to you. So thank you.
Good evening, everyone, and welcome to our Manitoba Town Hall meeting with our future Prime Minister, Andrew Scheer. It is so good to see all of you here, to see so many familiar faces. I see some of our colleagues from the provincial legislatures are here. I think Minister Ron Schuler is here as well. So good to see so many amazing Conservatives here. And maybe some of you are here because you voted Liberal last time and you really, really regret it. And you want to meet and hear from Andrew Scheer. And we want you to know you're really welcome. We're so glad that you're here. I'm here with two of my colleagues, Ted Falk, who is the Member of Parliament from Provencher. He's also our caucus chair for the Manitoba caucus. And he's the Deputy Shadow Minister for Immigration and Employment. And Larry Maguire, who's the Member of Parliament from Brandon-Souris. And he's also the Deputy Shadow Minister for Immigration.
And of course, all of you know Candace Bergen, the Honourable Candace Bergen, Member of Parliament for Portage-Lisgar, and our party's House Leader in the House of Commons.
Yes, Larry, thank you very much. And it is so good to see all of you here this evening. And you know what? I can't help but think that in less than a year from now, there's going to be Canadians all across this country gathering in ballrooms like this to celebrate their new Prime Minister. But before we do that this evening, we're going to take a moment because we are Canadians and we're proud to be Canadians. And we're going to stand and we're going to sing the national anthem led by Candace. So please join us and sing along with Candace.
Oh, Canada, our home and native land, true patriot love in all our sons' command. Qu'à bois se porter le pêle, il sait porter le croix. Ton histoire est une épopée, il sait pourquoi. God keep our land glorious and free. O Canada, we stand on guard for thee. O Canada, we stand on guard for thee.
Thank you. Please have your seat. In just a few moments, you're going to get to meet our leader, the Honourable Andrew Scheer, and to introduce him here this evening, I'm going to be calling on Member of Parliament from Selkirk, Interlake, Eastman, James Bazan, to do just that. James is here tonight with his wife Kelly, who prior to getting into politics were involved in the agriculture industry. James has three daughters, Courtney and Taylor and Cassidy, and he's also got a son-in-law, Pete, and he's a
grandson, James,
a newly minted grandson, James. So
somebody loves him.
James, it's good to have you here. We know you're going to introduce our leader. take it away.
Thanks, guys. What a great crowd. It's wonderful seeing all of you here to meet Andrew Scheer. You know, we have such a wonderful caucus, and you got to meet Candace, Ted, and Larry. Now, two of our caucus colleagues aren't with us tonight because they're in Ottawa, Senator Don Plett and MP Robert Sopuk. And Robert, as you all know, is retiring. And that means that we're getting our slate of new candidates all put in place. I can tell you that we have been working very hard as a caucus to make sure that we form that next government, that we replace Justin Trudeau and the Liberals. And we're going to do that by making sure that we have the greatest candidates possible in the 2019 election. I want to introduce some of them right now. Former president of the Keystone Agriculture Producers, the biggest farm organization, the candidate for Dauphin Swan River Neepawa, Dan Mazer. In St. Boniface, St. Vital, we're running a Métis candidate, a police officer. We also call her Mrs. Badass. And she's going to be the next MP for St. Boniface, St. Vital, Rajan Caron. Former member of Parliament, one of our great friends, somebody who lost in a very narrow election last time around in 2015, and who's going to be the next MP for Elmwood Transcona, Lawrence Tote. We miss him so much, we're going to double down our efforts to make sure that he's back on our team. Now, representing the future of the Conservative Party, representing the riding of Elmwood Transcona, or Transcona, St. Paul Transcona, Kildona St. Paul, Kildona St. Paul, tongue-tied. Raquel Dancho. You won't ever see Raquel stumble on any word. She's an amazing public speaker and really does represent the future of where our party's going. And former city councilor representing Charleswood, St. James, Assiniboia, and Headingley, Marty Moratz. Marty's going to be bringing his strong policy work, as well as the great work that he did here in the city of Winnipeg, to Ottawa, making sure that we are held accountable for our financial decisions and that we're spending taxpayers' money wisely. Now, nobody's worked harder, though, to make sure that we form government and that people have the great opportunity to vote for the Conservative Party than our leader, Andrew Scheer. Now, Andrew and I got elected together back in 2004. We've been doing this for 14 and a half years. And I can tell you, when we first got elected, Andrew and I were just, first of all, just happy to be there. But we got to join the under 40 caucus in the Conservative movement. We had all these young, dynamic people that had been elected in 2004 against that Paul Martin government. And we were just so excited to be there and be part of that under 40 caucus. Well, I only lasted in that caucus for about 11 months. Andrew's still in it. He's been there 14 and a half years, and he's had an amazing record as a parliamentarian. You know, he has quickly proved himself, became deputy speaker in the House of Commons, then was elected by his peers as the Speaker of the House of Commons, so the youngest Canadian ever to be elected Speaker, and now is our leader, leading the Conservative Party, which is strong, which is united, and is focused on winning the next election. Now, as you get to know Andrew and you get to hear more and more about him, you'll realize that he comes from humble beginnings. His dad worked in the newspaper industry. His mom was a nurse. Both of them are his heroes. You know, he worked hard. He had to work his way through college and university. He had to go out there and get a job and work in a small family business in the insurance industry in Saskatchewan, and just understands that you have to work hard, and you deserve to get rewarded for that, and that the dollars that you send to the government have to be respected. Andrew understands living paycheck to paycheck. He understands the struggles that we have as Canadians. He doesn't have a trust fund to fall back on. He wasn't born into privilege. He is one of us. So, ladies and gentlemen, I want you to welcome, with a warm friendly Manitoba welcome to our leader and the future Prime Minister of Canada, Andrew Scheer.
Well, thank you very much for that very warm welcome. It is a great pleasure for me to be here in Winnipeg in the great province of Manitoba with my colleagues, my future colleagues, and some friends in the provincial legislature as well. I love coming to Winnipeg. It's something that I didn't get to do a lot when I was younger. I grew up in Ottawa in Ontario, and the first time I visited Winnipeg was actually when my brother-in-law was playing for the Winnipeg Blue Bombers. He was the punter, John Ryan. So I married into Saskatchewan football royalty, and he ended up playing for the Blue Bombers. So being from Saskatchewan, I made for a little bit of some tough times when politically, as an elected member of Parliament, wearing a Blue Bombers jersey at Taylor Field. That was a little bit risky for a first-term politician, but I decided to go with supporting my family. So anyway, it started a long tradition of coming to Winnipeg from time to time, and of course, recently as leader, I've been able to come several times. And I love it every time. So many great people, and I want to thank all of you for coming out this evening. Now, tonight is all about you. Tonight is about your questions so that we can answer your concerns and we can speak to the issues that matter to you. But I'm going to lead us off by covering a few topics, and then we're going to get right into the question and answer period. And I've had the distinct pleasure of traveling across this country for the past year and a half as leader of the Conservative Party. And you know, last year in the summer, after winning the leadership, I would often get stopped at places and going through the airport where people would say, "Hey, you're the new leader of the Conservative Party, aren't you?" And I'd say, "Yeah, I'm Andrew Scheer, nice to meet you." And people would give me a thumbs up and say, "We're rooting for you. Good luck. Hope you win the next election." Now, a year and a half later, when people see me and recognize me and stop me, they're not just giving me a thumbs up and saying, "We're rooting for you." They're grabbing me by the arm, digging their fingers into my flesh and saying, "You better win the next election because we can't afford 4 more years of Justin Trudeau." Alors, c'est un grand plaisir d'être ici ce soir. On va parler sur beaucoup de sujets. On va discuter beaucoup des enjeux et j'ai hâte à répondre à vos questions. You know, a lot of people tell me that I smile too much, that I'm always in a good mood. They say, you know, you're always smiling. And I am. I love my job. I love working with great principled colleagues who are fighting for what's right for this country. I love my country. I love that we live in a place where we can have this type of system where voters and individuals get to choose their government. But I can tell you, it's getting harder and harder to keep that smile on when I watch what this government is doing to this country. And when I look at the last economic update, and I know that Justin Trudeau is reaching into the future and taking prosperity and wealth from my kids and my future grandkids, that makes me angry. It makes me angry watching him spend it on his political priorities today. It makes me frustrated that we live in a country where we have a government that talks down our energy sector. When our Prime Minister travels around the world and tells his friends on the international circuit that he's frustrated that he can't phase out the energy sector sooner. That makes me upset because I know so many hardworking men and women who are out of work because of this government's policies. And when I see radical groups protesting exports of Canadian energy, blockading getting our oil and gas to markets, but I don't see them lining up and down the St. Lawrence in eastern Canada, blocking tanker after tanker of foreign oil coming into this country. That makes me upset too. When I see a government that responds to a rise in violent crime by doing what they've always done and targeting law-abiding firearms owners who are responsible with their firearms, who follow all the laws that they're asked anyway. That makes me upset. I'd rather have a government that goes after the criminals, the gun smugglers, and the gang members. And that's what our party's going to do in the next election. We're going to repeal Bill C-71. And replace it with legislation that actually targets members of gangs and those who use firearms in the commission of offense. I think that's common sense. I think that's the least we can do for our community. You know, when we look at some of the challenges facing the world and Canada, we can all agree that Canada has to play its part in many, many different areas. Canada has always welcomed people from all around the world. Nous sommes un pays qui a accueilli les gens de partout au monde, de n'importe quel pays. We've always welcomed people who are coming to this country to take advantage of our freedom and our opportunities. Over the course of many, many generations, we've done that. But we have a system right now where, because of Justin Trudeau's irresponsible tweet, we have over 38,000 people crossing into Canada illegally. And if we're going to have a system where Canadians have confidence in their immigration system, we have to make sure that people come to Canada lawfully, and that we don't ask those who are coming to Canada the right way to wait longer because some people are jumping the queue and skipping the line. And a Conservative government would restore the integrity to our borders and have an immigration system that puts those fleeing legitimate persecution first, and those coming to Canada the right way will have their applications heard first. That is a fundamental principle that I think we can all agree on. Now, speaking about Twitter, I don't know if you saw, but just the other day, it was yesterday, in order to impress one of his friends, one of the international celebrities, Justin Trudeau just decided to tweet out that we're going to spend $50 million on an international development type of program because I don't know if you've heard of a guy named Trevor Noah. He's a TV personality. And so thanks to that, we now have, that's how we're doing spending announcements now. We're doing it through Twitter. So we've had a tweet that said all are welcome, that led to the problem at the border crossing. We've had famous tweets where Justin Trudeau issued a statement eulogizing Fidel Castro and say, although he was controversial, and now we have this one with the spending announcement. I don't know, maybe we should see if someone in the Prime Minister's office can take his smartphone away so he stops damaging Canada's international reputation. So this is what we're doing every day in the House of Commons. We're fighting for balanced budgets. We're fighting against legislation that targets law-abiding citizens and does nothing to actually tackle crime. And we are in the fight, we are in a major fight to prevent the Liberals from introducing and imposing their carbon tax on the hardworking people of this country. This carbon tax does nothing to do anything for the environment. There is nothing about this carbon tax that is about reducing emissions. And the reason why we know that is because this government gave a huge break to large industrial emitters. They can get a break of up to 90% of what they would have to pay under the carbon tax. Small business owners, they don't get a break. Commuters, those that have to drive around taking kids to schools or activities, they don't get a break. Farmers, people living in rural Canada that have to drive long distances to get to medical appointments, that use fuel every day for their farms, they don't get a break. This Liberal government has given a massive exemption to large industrial emitters. Conservatives will get a break and grant an exemption to every Canadian small business owner and individual commuters by repealing it altogether. So we're happy to talk about any of these issues tonight. I want to thank all of you for coming out. We're going to have enough time now for us to do a deep dive. There's nothing off limits. There's anything that you've heard about in the news, anything that's causing you to be concerned about something in federal politics. I'm happy to answer it, and I'm looking forward to taking your questions because this is what it's all about. It's all about being in the grassroots, out of the bubble in Ottawa, getting out of that area where You know, bureaucrats sitting around a boardroom table dream up things like a carbon tax that punishes commuters, like all the things that we've seen. So coming out here, talking to grassroots Canadians, hearing from your concerns directly is the part about this job that I love the most. So I'm so grateful that you're going to be here. I think Candace is going to come up. We're going to dive right into your questions, and then I'll be able to stick around and chat with you afterwards. But I just want to thank all of you for coming and being a part of this tonight. It is truly a great aspect of our Canadian democracy where you get to hold your elected officials directly accountable in this way. So thanks very much. Really appreciate you being here tonight.
Well, thanks, Andrew, for getting us fired up. And I think it's just great that Andrew is here and wanting to answer our questions. Just so you guys all know, there's nothing off limits. Andrew's going to answer any question you have. We will ask that you keep your preamble to absolutely no preamble, if you don't mind, or really short. 20 seconds in total. So if you've got a question, we've got James. James, you're not moderating. Ted is here with the mic. Ted, do you want to stand up? Larry is here. So if you've got a question, raise your hand. Keep it to 20 seconds or I'm going to cut you off. I'm good at that. I'm a mom and the house leader, so I can do that. And then Andrew is going to be answering your questions. So Ted, we're going to start. Tell us your first name and then your question.
Sure. My name's Debbie, and thank you very much for having this opportunity for us. Andrew, my question is that in light of the fact that Trudeau is paying over half $500 million for the media to support him, and in the states that we've seen their media outlets like Twitter and Facebook shut down conservative sites prior to their midterm election, what's our strategy for getting our message out during opposition like that?
Well, thank you, and that's a great question. I've had a lot of people concerned about exactly that part of the economic update, where the government announced that they were going to provide funding through a variety of ways to media outlets, and in typical Liberal fashion, there are a lot of concerns about how they're going to do that and what that will do to the independence of our media. And I have to say, I was pleased to see some columnists come out and criticize this by saying, it's doing a disservice to Canadians to have confidence in an independent media when you have big, the media companies themselves dependent on that funding. Now, of course, it will make it challenging for us. We've always had a tough time getting our message out unfiltered. I'll give you an example. In the last provincial election, there was a group on social media that came out to support common sense, right of center, small c conservative policies. And the CBC did an expose of that. They said, they looked into it and they said, is this time that we look at third-party groups getting involved in elections? And I thought to myself, happy to have that conversation, but what about 2015 when we saw Unifor and the Lead Now groups and the Pembina Institutes and all these groups on the left coming out targeting conservative MPs and working very, very hard to defeat conservative in a very partisan way. So it is very concerning when you see this type of double standard applied. We're going to keep doing what we're doing. You asked how we're going to get our message out. We are using social media. All of us have taken to boosting our presence on social media so we can speak directly to people. I'd encourage all of you to like your Conservative Member of Parliament pages, like my page, share the content so that your friends and family can see that so we can speak directly to people. Doing things like this where we're able to talk to people directly, we're streaming this on our social media as well. We're going to be doing more and more of that so that Canadians can get that information directly and not through those other filters.
All right, Larry's got someone here.
Hello, Andrew. Yeah, Candace, pleasure to talk to you. I've been working my butt off for you before you got the leader. And I have a webpage with over 3,000 people on it. I opened up a question to them today to ask you. And I had 2,600 responses on it. And the one main question they have, and there was tons of them, but the most the responses I got is with regards to the UN Migration Pact. We need you to be tougher and let Trudeau know you're not going to take this shit, okay? We've had it. There's only one question in this country right now. If that gets through, all the rest are redundant. Please, sir, we need your help.
Well, thank you for that question. I can tell you that I've experienced very similar levels of concerns when I do Facebook Lives, when I open up the floor to questions at events. It is a question that comes up time and time again. And I want to say that we have already stated our position on that, and we will, I don't want to give too much away, but we will be very loudly and articulating that position throughout the next few days. And I can tell you right now, unequivocally, straight up, we are opposed to Canada signing on to that compact.
No, Larry, we'll go right here.
Hello, Mr. Scheer. My name is Debbie. Cannabis. Welcome to Canada. We know it's legal. We're not going to put, in James's word, we're not going to put toothpaste back in the tube. But we know it was put in too soon and very unregulated. What's your plan? We know that surveys and different medical reports have said that the youth's brain doesn't stop developing till about the age 23 to 25. Is there any chance we can raise the limit of purchase of cannabis?
Yes, we can. And I will agree with you. This is something that we were warning the government. They had a political, artificially imposed deadline on this timeline. They ignored the concerns of provincial premiers, of health experts, of different health authorities. The municipal law enforcement were all saying we're not ready yet. The test for impaired driving is not ready. The ability to be sure that you can prosecute and get convictions. We've got in Canada a very well-established regime around getting convictions for impaired driving when it comes to alcohol, but not with cannabis. And that none of that has been established, and the tests have not been proven to be accurate enough to meet those very high legal thresholds. So they ignored all of that, and they plowed ahead, and it became legal, as you know, earlier this fall. So we are looking along those exact lines. As a father of 5, I don't like the signal that this sends to my children. I worry about a young person turning 18 and thinking, well, it's legal, it must be safe. And so they're going to go in and consume it, where, as you pointed out rightly, lots and lots of medical access, as close to a consensus as you can get in the medical community, saying that there's so much brain development that goes on later into life. So we are looking at raising that. The initial conversations that we've had, we are looking at that 21 type of area. We haven't yet formulated our specific policies that we'll be promising in the election campaign, but raising the age of consumption is something that we are actively looking at as to how to enshrine in the legislation. Thank you.
Larry?
My name is Fred Kelbert. Can you, as the leader of the Progressive Conservative Party, bring a meeting together of all the premiers of this country to hammer out an interprovincial trade agreement that will remove trade barriers between the provinces, and do it if the Liberals get back in, and I hope I'm wrong, I really do, but if they do get back in, for whatever, can it be done independent of the federal government? And if it can't be because of the Constitution, can the notwithstanding clause be employed to bring it about and say the hell with them?
Well,
pardon my French.
We're getting some spicy language in Winnipeg tonight.
We got to have a jar, a penny, a donation for everyone.
Well, sir, I appreciate your passion on this, because it is so frustrating. Nothing drives me. Lots of things drive me crazy. I won't say nothing drives me, but it is one of the things that drives me crazy. When you look at the barriers we have for Canadians to trade freely between each other, and we just went through a very difficult period with our largest trading partner, making the case for free trade, trying to convince Americans to fight to keep those borders open between our two countries, to fight against the protectionist streak that is flowing through the world right now. And yet here at home, we haven't been able to tear down those barriers within our own provinces. It's easier to ship goods and buy goods with the U.S. in many areas than it is for someone from Manitoba to go and sell something to someone from Ontario. I believe it's time for the Prime Minister to play a leadership position in this. And I have a great deal of respect for provincial premiers and the challenges they have. And they have meetings every year where they get together and they talk about what they're going to ask Ottawa for. They're gonna have a list of demands from the federal government. They're going to go and they're going to talk about very important things. I'm not suggesting that they're not important, but I'm going to tell you something. When they have those meetings, I'm going to have a list of my own. And that list is going to be tearing down those trade barriers. And if they want access to some of the federal programming that's built around stimulating the economy and promoting jobs and skills and training, they need to do the very basic step of removing interprovincial trade barriers in order to get that. So absolutely, I believe it's possible by using the incentives that the federal government have, and wherever there is federal legislation, because some of these barriers are empowered by federal legislation, because deals were made between premiers and prime ministers in the past. Wherever there is federal legislation that enables provincial barriers, we're going to repeal that, because I'm not in the business of making it harder to buy goods and sell services here in Canada between Canadians.
Hi, my name is Omar. My last name is Hyde. My question is, thanks for your concern for oil prices. We are actually selling 1/3 of our oil to the United States. My quick question is that $80 million we are losing every day. What is the Conservative Party of Canada stands for? What's the loophole? Do we need to build an oil refinery? Or why we are losing so much money every day? $18 billion a year, we can sum up here.
This is a very timely question. For those of you that have been following the news today, you may have heard that the government of Alberta is proposing drastic steps to cut back on production in order to try to address the differential between the U.S. and Canada. Right now, we are losing millions and millions of dollars a day. All of Canada is losing. This isn't just about the province of Alberta. We have manufacturing sectors all over the country, financial service companies. We have people who have worked in the energy sector and then gone back to their home provinces and used the wealth and prosperity that they've earned to help build something in their own communities. It's quite simple. We only have one customer. We only have one customer, and they're not giving us a fair price for our product. Why do we only have one customer? Because Justin Trudeau killed every pipeline that was on the books. When he was Prime Minister, when he took over, there were 3 major pipeline proponents who were going to take private sector investor dollars and build pipelines to open up new markets. Northern Gateway was a deep water port that would have allowed us to ship through the big tankers to Asian markets, opening up new markets. Energy East would have taken Western Canadian energy, displacing foreign oil into Eastern Canada. And that was killed. You know how he did that one? Northern Gateway he just vetoed. He was just a stroke of the pen. Energy East, he did something very, very, very tricky. He imposed an upstream and downstream emissions test on Energy East. Now, what that means is that normally when you do an environmental assessment, you have to account for greenhouse gas emissions on the project itself. And what the Trudeau Liberals did is they said, well, no, we're not just going to make them account for that. We're going to make them account for all the upstream emissions that come from the natural resource extraction. And then we're going to make them account for all the emissions from the oil after it's been refined and put into vehicles and driven around. No other industry in the country faces that. The tanker full of Saudi oil coming into Eastern Canada doesn't have to account for upstream and downstream emissions either. Or human rights, thank you. Yeah, you know, Justin Trudeau wants to talk about an impact assessment on male construction workers coming in to build pipelines. I don't know that he's ever asked for an impact assessment on buying oil from Saudi Arabia, a country that has a terrible human rights record for women and girls. That's a double standard that we should be standing up and fighting back on. So very quickly, our party supports we support our energy sector. We know it's good for all of Canada. We will get those pipelines built. It starts by electing a Conservative government that will repeal Bill C-69, the No More Pipeline Bill, removing the carbon tax so that we don't place that additional burden on our energy sector. It also means enshrining in legislation the principle that it is the federal government's jurisdiction to act in the national interest so that one provincial government can't hold these types of things hostage. That's all part of our plan to get these pipelines built, and we will do so the old-fashioned way, which is allowing private sector companies to do it. Justin Trudeau has bought a pipeline with your money that he can't build. Conservatives will build them without having to buy them.
Larry.
Hi, Andrew. My name is Sandy Bloomfield, and I'm really glad you came in. I was hoping somebody from the West would
thanks very much.
What happens to us. My concern is that I live in my own home. I'm a senior, and everything's going up. and has gone up. The property taxes are rising every year. The utilities are rising. Hydro's going up. Everybody's got permission to have a raise, except the seniors. And I want to know, did you forget about us, or, I mean, as a whole? We're very important voters.
Yes. No, we didn't forget about you, believe me. And you know, when the Conservative Party was in office, we always, every budget had something in it to recognize the valuable contribution that seniors have made to build this country, and introduce different measures to help recognize that contribution. So for example, whether it was introducing pension splitting for seniors, the first government to recognize that, whether it was the things like the tax-free savings accounts, which benefited a lot of seniors as they moved money out of different aspects of their retirement savings. The seniors tax credit itself, just recognize that seniors have extra costs, and so a tax credit directly to seniors, as well as a whole host of other measures. But you talked about something that I'm hearing more and more about as I travel across the country, and that is the cost of living and the affordability gap, the cost of living crunch that people are facing. And I hear it time and time again that they see Justin Trudeau talking about GDP and debt to GDP ratios and all these types of things. But then they turn around and they say their home utilities are going up, carbon taxes are going to make things more expensive. In many centers, it's housing issues, it's the cost of transportation. And none of their policies are directed to that. In fact, we actually had an exchange in the House of Commons when I asked, one of our team asked the question about how the debt will be more expensive for the government because interest rates are going up. And the Bank of Canada just raised interest rates, and that's going to squeeze a lot of people as they make their mortgage payments and their line of credit and things like that. And the Prime Minister actually said, it's a good thing that interest rates are going up. It's a sign of a good economy. It's like, well, tell that to people who are, $200 away from not making it to the end of the month, can't afford to make a car repair bill if something happened, and are living paycheck to paycheck. They're not happy about paying higher interest rates. So, that's the type of attitude we have from a Prime Minister that just sloughs it all off when real issues are affecting people who haven't had the luxury of inheriting a family fortune and do worry about the debt that they're carrying. They're not celebrating interest rate hikes. So I can assure you that the Conservative government in 2019 will absolutely be focused on making life more affordable, helping people get ahead, not just get by.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to meet you. I'm going to do this really quickly. I'm a first-generation immigrant born here. My parents came from war-torn Europe. My mother survived Stalin's famine. My father was taken into Hitler's army by gunpoint. They're both very well versed in socialism. I'm very antisocial. I see a prime minister in this country right now that runs around, does whatever he feels like, and thinks he's completely untouchable. I've been following you guys in the House of Commons, and his argument, and it's things that seem to fall on a deaf ear. You might as well go talk to that wall over there for the intelligence that you're getting responding back to you. Can you please assure me that there's actually going to be an election in 2019? Because I think we have a dictator for life incoming.
Wow. I totally understand where people get upset on this, because we do see some very anti-democratic moves that this government is making. Big government intrusive. And it starts, we raise the alarm bell on this, but when you see a government start violating our charter rights in this country, it's scary. It's a scary sign of things to come. When you see them changing the election laws to give them an advantage, to take away tools that the opposition has to take them into account. Candace was House Leader. She is House Leader. She had to deal with the same thing I had to deal with when I was House Leader. The Liberals bring in motions to try to take away the power of the opposition in the House of Commons, to hold them to account, to get information. When I talked about violating Canadian charter rights, we saw how this government wants to impose its own viewpoint on Canadians when they forced individuals and groups to sign an attestation to get Canada Summer Jobs funding. That is an unacceptable affront to the very principle, the very foundation of our charter rights, which is the right to freedom of belief and the freedom of opinion. And so I am very concerned. And you talked about socialism. When you look at the logical extension of what this government's economic policies are, I am very concerned about where they would go if they got a second term. So we know what it does. And one of the things I worry about is, you know, I grew up watching Eastern Europe throw off the shackles of communism. And I saw the arguments that were being made at the time, where you had Reagan and Thatcher and Mulroney here in Canada making the case for free market principles. Fundamental concepts like free people, buying and selling freely, exchanging goods and services freely, has done more to lift people out of prosperity than anything else in human history. And there is not enough money in existence in the Canadian government to do that through government. It always comes from the free markets working as they should. So when I see this government trying to control more and more of our economy and dictate and change behavior, I worry that we are heading down a very dark path where more and more people will be less well off than they would be if you had a conservative government that's always fighting to leave more and more money in your pockets, let people do what they do best, and that is make their own decisions.
Larry?
Good evening, Andrew. Thank you for being here to hear from us. There are a couple of files, which I have to do this as briefly as I can, which are really controversial but important. And we need you, as leader of the party, to articulate a position that we can understand as citizens and we can believe will be done. Those files, of course, are the matter of our resources and how we're going to develop them, particularly oil and gas. And the announcement by Ms. Notley this week tells us how important that is. The second is the so-called Aboriginal file. And my question to you is, what can you tell us now? And what do you plan to tell us soon? Explicitly and boldly. Explicitly so we can understand it. Boldly because we must distinguish ourselves from the Liberals. On the matter of our resources and what we're going to do to aid and assist the development that is there to be done. And the other is, how do we march into the future with First Nations and the Métis?
Well, I have indicated very explicitly, and I will do so again and more in the lead up to the next election campaign, about how a conservative government will be a champion for our oil and gas sector. Not embarrassed about it, not trying to leave it in the ground. I mean, I saw Liberals today reacting to this announcement that they are going to cut back on production in Alberta. And listening to the way, looking at their tweets, you would think that this was all part of their plan. That they just want to leave it in the ground. We saw that in the last election where we had people on the far left with the LEAP manifesto saying that that's the best thing for Canada is to leave that oil and gas in the ground. I disagree with that. I think Canada should be loud and proud on the world stage about what we do here in the energy sector. We take our oil and gas out of the ground with the highest environmental standards in the world, with the highest labor standards in the world. And the profits from that extraction go into pension funds that help support seniors and are there for retirement savings for Canadians. It allows young men and women from all over the country to come and get jobs and support their families. It provides a sustainable, environmentally friendly source of energy by having that extracted here in Canada than when we rely on importing it from other countries. I visited India a few weeks ago and I toured the largest oil refinery in the world. And you know that every once in a while they get a shipment of oil from Canada. It's not always easy because of the way we don't have the capacity to get it to the coast, but sometimes it's available and they purchase some of it and they refine it. And you know what they do with it after they refine it? They sell it back to us. They sell it back to us. It goes across the Pacific into the refinery and then across, up and around, and into Eastern Canadian markets. That makes no sense. And that's why Canadians deserve a government that champions the energy sector, takes credit for what we do well. There's no benefit to global emissions if we overregulate and overtax and chase out jobs and emissions to other countries. And the emissions just go up. We can do things here in Canada at a fraction of the emissions that can be done in other countries around the world. We should be taking credit for that, not punishing Canadian industries and Canadian workers for the great work that they do. Now, you used the word bold. used the word bold a few times for the next subject, and that is how the federal government will work with the Aboriginal community to improve their quality of life as well as full partners. And we will be, in a very detailed way, outlining what we believe we would be able to achieve as a government in 2019. Perry Bellegarde is the chief of the AFN, and he's from my riding. He was actually chief in one of the 12 reserves that I have in my riding. And we've had some great, meaningful conversations about how we can work towards this in partnership. And I do believe that we can make progress if we have that mutual understanding about what truly will improve the quality of life for First Nations, Aboriginal, and Métis Canadians. And that is ensuring that they benefit from the economic prosperity by being full partners and full participants and fully active within that. That is the best thing to do. Yes, the federal government has obligations and responsibilities and have agreed to things that it must always uphold its end of the bargain. But we also need to understand that the challenges facing First Nations and Aboriginal Canadians cannot just be solved with more and more dollars coming from Ottawa. It has to come from changing the dynamic, changing the paradigm, making sure that First Nations people have an ability to participate in our economy. That's the true way to lift people out of poverty and improve the quality of life.
Back there with Ted.
Good evening, sir. My name's Dean. It's a real simple question. For the last decade, 2 decades, 3 decades, even 4 decades, Canada's leader, no matter what party they were from, has been an actual leader on the world stage and not somebody to be ridiculed about their socks, to be ignored by our most southern neighbor at talks and not even given a handshake or an acknowledgement. What are you going to do to make sure that you're the leader that the world looks to?
Well, it starts by clearly articulating what it is that you want your country to stand for. And it is not about running around and impressing celebrities or getting retweets or chasing or campaigning for a UN Security Council seat, willing to say anything to anybody. It starts by saying, this is what Canada stands for. This is what we will speak out against. When we see evil being done, we will be out there and unafraid to call it that. We will stand up for our allies. We will recognize the fundamental principles that guide a foreign policy. We will not be afraid to speak out against one, for example. We have a government right now. It has been a Canadian tradition for generations, liberal or conservative, that when the United Nations introduces one-sided resolutions singling out Israel, that Canada has voted against that. Always. Justin Trudeau has changed that, and he started abstaining from those votes. Well, when on the one hand you call Israel a friend and an ally, part about being a friend is showing up and taking a position and supporting your friends when the chips are falling. Meanwhile, there was a vote condemning the human rights abuses in Cuba. And when that resolution was going through the United Nations, Trudeau's Liberals didn't just abstain, they actually voted against that. They sided with Cuba when it comes to fundamental human rights like freedom of the press and freedom of speech. So, whether it's how the Prime Minister carries himself on the world stage, I went to India, I didn't have anywhere near the trouble that he had with his trip. We In fact, it was a very positive trip. I had a meeting with Prime Minister Modi early on in the trip. We talked about how Canada can provide India with its energy needs so that they don't have to buy oil from some players in the region that don't have a great record on things like human rights. Learned a lot about how Canada and India can improve its ties. I went to the United Kingdom to talk about a Canada-UK free trade deal. And I've been to Washington to support free trade. So everywhere I go when I'm traveling internationally, I've carried on the tradition of when an opposition leader is outside the country that we present that united front because we're all Team Canada. We all want Canada to succeed in the world. But I've made those points of where a conservative government would go respectfully and articulately. And we have to remember that it's not just with the U.S. president that this prime minister has had trouble with. Justin Trudeau has had a lot of trouble with international leaders. He had the Prime Minister of Australia and Japan furious at him because of his erratic behavior during the TPP talks. Of course, he went to China, famously expecting to come back with a free trade, the beginning of a free trade deal. And he couldn't even negotiate a photo op with the Chinese government because they refused to have one the way he wanted it. So he's got a terrible record on the world stage, and Canadians are suffering for it because we aren't getting access to the ability to move our important files forward. So that's my approach. Articulate what you stand for as a country firmly and on the front end, and then be unafraid to always be on the right side. So standing up for our allies, speaking out against evil, and working with our partners who share our values to help promote peace and prosperity around the world.
Larry?
Hi, Andrew. My name's Gary Chase, and going back to energy, we have a little problem that we're going to own after the next election called Trans Mountain Pipelines. And while I don't like the way we got there, we have it. What do we do with it now?
You create the framework to get it built. You remove the obstacles, and you put the goalposts in one spot, and then you sell it to the private sector. That's the best recipe to get out of Trans Mountain. You picture what happened. Bill Morneau today said something along the lines of, well, it's the provincial government's responsibility and the energy companies themselves to manage their way out of this situation. I can't stand it when Justin Trudeau shirks responsibility. He loves blaming other people. He loves always pointing the finger at somebody else and saying, it's not his fault. It's not his fault that this can't, yeah, we know that. It's not his fault. He's always blaming other people when things don't go well. On this one, it is entirely at his feet that we have this situation. And with Trans Mountain, we had a situation that we had a private sector company, US-based, willing to take their investor dollars into the Canadian economy to build a pipeline to get our energy to market. Now, they didn't get out of the energy business. They just got out of the energy business in Canada. And Justin Trudeau gave them $4.5 billion of your money to help send them on their way. And now they're taking those tax dollars and they're building pipelines in the US to compete against us. It's ridiculous. Every single energy proponent I've met, whether it's on the extraction side or the pipeline side, they just want to know where the goalposts are. And they'll line up and kick the ball. But they can't have a government that's always playing Lucy Brown to their Charlie Brown. Sorry, Lucy to their Charlie Brown. Yanking the football away. And that's what's happening. They're being told, well, one more review or one more court case or one more round of consultations. They deserve a government that gets it right the first time so that there's certainty and clarity. And once we have a government that can do that, I believe the investment will flow back in. It does. It goes to places where they can get that certainty. So that's our commitment after the next election.
Thank you, Andrew. Thank you for coming again to Winnipeg. Appreciate it very much. I'm a conservative. I very much appreciate your focus on fiscal responsibility and driving the economic engine and things like that. But I've shared with you in the past that I'm also a bit of a frustrated conservative because of our unwillingness to address the issue of human rights of preborn children. I know it's a sensitive topic, but you did open it up, and I appreciate you addressing the question. We need to get in line with every other democracy in the world by recognizing the human rights interest of preborn children. An international standards law would accomplish this by regulating abortion after 13 weeks. Prior to 13 weeks, it would ensure free access to counseling and support for all women facing an unplanned pregnancy. Would you, your candidates, and the MPs consider supporting international standards law for human rights for preborn children? Thank you.
Well, let me thank you for that question. And let me thank you for being here and raising that. I will say what I've always said on this issue, and that is, as Prime Minister, I will not introduce legislation that will open up this particular subject. That is something that I believe is very important as the leader of a movement, of a caucus with people of diverse views on many different aspects about it. It's my job to find the common areas that Conservatives can agree on. But I'll say this, I absolutely respect your right to say what you just said. And I absolutely do believe that, that people like yourself should not be demonized for having a difference of opinion, and that you can respectfully have differences of opinion on aspects of these, and that is what a healthy democracy is all about. So in finding those areas of common ground, the Conservative Party in the past have often identified areas where we can agree on things from different aspects of the Conservative spectrum. For example, it was a Conservative government that recognized that the government needs to do more to fight human trafficking, something that was, yes, very important to social conservatives, but important to all kinds of conservatives as well. It was a women's health issue. It was a dignity of human beings issue. It was a Conservative government that raised the age of consent from 14 to 16. Again, something that enjoyed common ground for many, well, the entire Conservative movement at the time. So as I will stay committed to that commitment that I made to the membership of the party, not to introduce legislation on this, I have always said that it is a fundamental right for Canadians to have differences of opinion, to express those views, and to have that protected. And that is why our government was so vocal. Our party was so vocal against things like the summer jobs attestation, which was not just talking about deciding where government funding was going, but actually dictating who could access government funding based on their own personal beliefs, one way or the other, whether or not they had a belief. So that is the commitment that I will follow. But I do, like I say, appreciate where you're coming from and appreciate you being here and raising that question.
Over here, Larry.
My name is Ricky. The question is about healthcare, mental health specifically. Currently, it's inadequate. If an individual walks into the CMHA in downtown Winnipeg, there is a wait list anywhere from weeks to months to talk to a therapist or to get help, unless you're suicidal. At that point, then you get bumped to the front of the line. So what are your thoughts on how we could change that?
You know, there was a dinner in Regina for the Saskatchewan Mental Health Association, and I sat beside the keynote speaker who was giving a speech that evening, and he put it to me, he put it very well. He said, if you go into your GP and you get your heart checked, if he's worried about your heart, you could be in the hospital that day, and you can get seen to. There are people who have gone in for checkups and end up having a bypass within 24 hours, because when there's that level of concern, the healthcare system moves very quickly. But he said, try going to a GP and saying things like you're depressed, or that you're having trouble, or that you're not sure, that you're considering things. You're not getting help that day. There's a big gap in our mental health services, and it starts with recognizing mental health as being on the same level of any other type of physical ailment when it comes to threatening your own well-being. That's going to take a lot of work. It's a lot of work to get there. We've had some great work done by our party with Senator Denise Batters, who has championed mental health issues and talked about everything from suicide prevention to funding and research, working on destigmatizing mental health issues. We've had a great report where we've been calling on the government to fund through a national framework a strategy for mental health to make sure those services are adequate. We need to broaden up. There are some people who thankfully, and you know, it's great to have that, who because of their job or their own ability have the access to counseling if they need it, whether it's covered through a workplace health program or if they have the ability to purchase it. But a lot of people don't, and they're no less at risk for mental health issues than anybody else, and they're no less deserving to have that help when they do seek it for their mental health issues. So I'm not going to promise you an easy overnight, you know, within 90 days type of thing, because it will take a lot of work and a lot of investment. But I do recognize it as a glaring gap in our healthcare system across the country, and I will absolutely, we talked about sitting down with the provincial premiers on trade issues. I'll be very much looking forward to sitting down with the provincial premiers to talk about what we can do to address that gap in terms of mental health services.
We've only got time for about 2 more questions, but I think Andrew, you're going to be around a little bit chatting with people. So before we get to those, I did just get a note. There is, for those of you who aren't aware, there's a by-election going on right now, a federal by-election in a riding of Leeds-Grenville, which is the riding of our former colleague Gord Brown, who passed away very suddenly. I guess it was about a year ago or a little bit less.
It was in the spring.
It was in the spring. So we did just get a note Andrew. Only a couple of polls are in.
I think our microphones are too close.
We are. But it looks like so far so good.
Okay, so far early results in, not official, but looking good. Michael Barrett, our Conservative candidate, he's ahead of the Liberals, and he's doubling their vote count right now. So
we'll see. All right, 2 more questions. We've got one over here, and then we'll finish with this one.
Hello, my name is Alex. The UN Migrant Compact is the thing that's been on my mind the most. And when I was lying down in bed this morning, it occurred to me, because I know that your party is opposed to that, it makes me wonder if it's possible for the Conservative government to maybe hypothetically introduce maybe like a constitution, or maybe not a constitution, but similar to the First Amendment for free speech, like the U.S. Constitution has, just on the off chance that something like this, if we have another Liberal MP like this, that this can never happen again.
So, it's something that anytime you talk about the Constitution, there's a whole layer of challenge for one particular political party to go, and I'm not suggesting we would go down there. I would, I believe it starts with just not signing it. That will be our position, and we'll have more to say on that in the days to come. But there are things in that compact, in that agreement, that really do worry me. And you talked about freedom of speech, and in that there are lots of concerns being raised about the ability to criticize certain types of policies once that's signed onto. And so that's why we are where we're at. And I don't want to give too much away from the days ahead, but we will be increasing the attention on this as it becomes more and more likely. It looks like this government, this Prime Minister, wants to sign it. So we're going to be we'll definitely have more to say on that. But when it comes to the UN, I've always found it, very, very rich that we have the United Nations with certain committees on it. Certain things like Syria sitting on the Human Rights Commission, or Saudi Arabia sitting on the Commission for Women's Rights. And then, they're going to come and they're going to lecture Canada about how we manage things and how we welcome people from around the world. I'm not in the business to please people at the UN. I'm in the business to stand up and work for Canadians.
All right, our last question right here.
My name's Jordan. Thank you for taking my question. My frustration that I feel right now is that with all the corruption and just total incompetence with this government is the lack of awareness that seems to be that most people have. Because you try to get it out, you try to explain these things to people, and you get the people who still blindly support the Liberals and Trudeau. And then you get the ones that are just kind of, they don't take it seriously. And my question to you is, at what point between now and the election are we going to see more visibility from you as the leader and from the Conservative Party? Because if, the things that are going on are really quite terrifying, all the things, there's so many of them, but this government is able to get away with, defeating motions that would hold them accountable for illegal activity, illegal spending, and they do it with such arrogance, and they do it because they know that people are largely blind to it. And of course, with them having the media in their back pocket, they can say all the horrible things about you and the Conservative Party, and people buy it. So we need more of a counterattack, or go on the to really get out there and get the message out.
I totally get where you're coming from. The two most common pieces of feedback I get is, I didn't realize you were so tall, and we need to see more of you out there, which is what we've been doing. And I smile too much. That's the number 3? Yeah. And that's it. So we recognize that. I recognize that. Now, I will say that I think part of what leads to that feeling is the very high degree of frustration that people have with this government. And I find it true myself, you know, when I talk to friends who aren't very political, and they say, well, they haven't heard about the StatsCan raiding their personal information, or they didn't know that this thing had happened. And it is frustrating. But I can tell you that when we and we do strategically, engage really, really comprehensively on certain issues, we've had a very high success rate. The attack on small businesses that the Liberals started a little over a year ago, we were able to defeat almost 90% of that. They had to walk back most of what they were trying to do because we worked with chambers of commerce, we worked with entrepreneurs, small business owners across the country, and we were successful on that. We just saw today, that the Liberals officially pulled back on the StatsCan financial data breach. So that was... And that was because of sustained engagement on that. So we don't have the same tools at our disposal. I travel this country relentlessly. I'm doing media everywhere I go. I'm doing town halls. We're doing social media. When the Prime Minister arrives, he gets instant media attention. We have some news bureaus that don't cover our events and decide not to include our voice in the story. That's frustrating. We point that out whenever we can. But all that to say is we are laying down a foundational track for the next election. And that is when all of the hard work we've been doing, putting down those markers on policy, me getting out more and more, making those personal connections, our candidates in ridings that we're going to win back doing the exact same thing in 338 ridings across the country. And I'm very optimistic about that. We are winning. We're winning. We're winning in the House of Commons when we convince them to back down from their terrible ideas. We're winning when we have Justin Trudeau on the run every single day in question period. He can't answer simple questions. He's afraid of our front bench. He's afraid of being there. He way prefers to be on the road and at big fancy events. We're beating him fundraising. Thanks to our strong principled commitment on issues and our the passion of our donors, we out fundraise the Liberals 2-1, quarter after quarter after quarter, because we are standing up for those principles and policies, and we're beating them at the ballot box. We won a by-election by staying true to our conservative principles, by fighting for balanced budgets, by fighting against attacks on entrepreneurs and standing up for families. We won a by-election in Quebec in the spring that we hadn't won since 1997. So it's working, it's winning. We've got a clear path forward. It's going to take a lot of work. It's not going to be easy, but nothing for Conservatives has ever comes handed to us. We have to work extra hard than the other guys. Yeah, I appreciate the question. So the question was, because you didn't have the microphone, what about the vote splitting because of Maxime Bernier? Let me see. Thank you. Yes, yeah. No, look. It's unfortunate. I can speak for our colleagues that since the leadership race, we thought everybody was all rowing in the same direction. Every Wednesday, every member of our caucus can get up at a microphone, 2 microphones in our caucus room. They can say whatever they want. They can tell me the things I need to change. They can tell our shadow ministers where we should be focusing. We have big, robust debates. We don't always agree with each other, and we have some passionate arguments. We have one MP after the other duking it out with the battle of ideas. And then when we find the consensus and when we see where the path ahead lies and we can get the most amount of agreement, we pick a course and we go after it. We all agree that when that decision is made, because we're working as a team, we get behind it and we go. And the types of things that Maxime started talking about recently, he never raised. It never raised. It was very hard to understand where this dissatisfaction came from. So I've decided not to worry about Maxime as an individual. He's made his choice. He's made his choice not to work as a team and not to try to do everything we can do collectively to defeat Justin Trudeau. But I'm going to talk to people who are listening to him. And I'm going to say, where is the problem that Maxime Bernier is solving? Because issue by issue, it's the Conservative Party that is standing up for things like an immigration system based on the integrity of our borders. It's the Conservative Party that's fighting for lower taxes, more economic freedom, and less control in our daily lives. It's the Conservative Party that's fighting for Canada to have a strong, principled foreign policy where we are sovereign to make our own decisions and not signing on to things where we're delegating that authority to other organizations around the world. So that is my message to the people that are, I understand that there's a very high degree of dissatisfaction for Justin Trudeau. And the best way to solve that problem is to work with the Conservative Party, get our Conservative candidates elected, make sure that Justin Trudeau is a one-term Prime Minister, and we have a Conservative government that's putting people first in this country.
Thanks so much, Andrew, for that. I think that is a message that we can all agree on, and that is that we want to defeat Justin Trudeau in 2019. And if we're focused on that goal, I think that we can accomplish it. But thanks for being
My
here,
pleasure.
answering all these questions. We know you'll come back to Manitoba.
Absolutely.
And we'll have more questions for you. We're a pretty friendly crowd.
Yeah. I'm jumping. I will say I grew up in Ottawa, but I am jumping on board the, being in Saskatchewan, Regina, Westerner, I am jumping on board the Winnipeg Jets bandwagon.
The Jets, yeah,
so
they're doing great.
They're fun to watch.
Overtime last night.
I hope you don't mind if there's space for one more.
Yeah.
I'm
No,
on
you're
board the
welcome.
bandwagon. Okay.
Thank you all for being here. We're finished the evening. We really appreciate all of you. We appreciate Andrew being here and each one of you. We look forward to you helping us in the next election, working together. Like you said, Andrew, we can't do it on our own, and it's going to be a battle. We've got a lot of opposition, and so we're going to work together. But thank you all for being here, and have a great evening. Thanks.
Thanks very much, everyone.